Labour's ECHR suspension bombshell, when Keir Starmer goes full Priti Patel. Right then, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about Labour's approach to immigration. We're not talking about some backbench Tory rebel here. We're talking about a Labour peer, Lord Blunkett no less, essentially telling Keir Starmer to rip up Britain's human rights commitments to get tough on migration. Yes, you heard that correctly. The party that spent years hammering the Conservatives for their authoritarian tendencies is now being advised by one of their own heavyweight figures to suspend the European Convention on Human Rights. If that doesn't make you sit up and take notice, frankly, you haven't been paying attention to British politics. Now, before we dive into this absolute political bombshell, let's establish exactly who Lord Blunkett is, because his intervention carries serious weight. This isn't some newly minted peer with delusions of grandeur. David Blunkett was Tony Blair's Education Secretary and later Home Secretary, a man who's navigated the treacherous waters of Labour politics for decades. When he speaks on matters of immigration and security, people listen. And what he's saying right now should have alarm bells ringing across Westminster, because it represents a fundamental shift in Labour thinking that could reshape British politics for a generation. The proposal itself is breathtaking in its audacity. Lord Blunkett wants Starmer's government to temporarily suspend key elements of the ECHR, specifically the bits that make it awkward to deport people, for up to 6 months. His reasoning? Germany did it for 3 months and apparently got results, so why shouldn't Britain follow suit? It's the political equivalent of seeing your neighbor's controversial garden renovation and deciding to copy it, except instead of potentially annoying the local planning committee, you're potentially undermining 7 decades of European human rights law. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating and deeply uncomfortable for anyone who remembers Labour's previous incarnation. Blunkett's argument centers on what he delicately describes as getting a grip on migration numbers, specifically targeting the thousands of asylum seekers currently housed in hotels across Britain. We're talking about more than 32,000 people in around 200 hotels, costing taxpayers an absolute fortune while the appeals process grinds on interminably. The numbers are genuinely staggering. Over 50,000 migrants have filed appeals against rejected asylum applications, double last year's figure. That's not just a bureaucratic backlog. That's a system in complete meltdown. The mechanics of what Blunkett proposes are as radical as they sound. Articles 3 and 8 of the ECHR, the one protecting against torture and guaranteeing family life, are routinely cited in deportation appeals. Strip away those protections, even temporarily, and suddenly the legal landscape shifts dramatically in favor of the state. No more endless appeals based on human rights grounds. No more last-minute injunctions from Strasbourg. Just swift, efficient removals. It's what every Home Secretary since Theresa May has dreamed of, and now it's being proposed not by some hard-right conservative, but by a Labour grandee who helped shape New Labour's approach to civil liberties. What makes this intervention particularly explosive is the timing. Keir Starmer spent years as Director of Public Prosecutions building his reputation as a defender of legal process and human rights. His entire political persona was constructed around being the sensible, legally-minded alternative to conservative populism. Yet here he is, barely months into government, being advised by his own party's elder statesman to essentially be the legal framework that underpins modern European democracy. The transformation from human rights lawyer to potential human rights suspender would be remarkable if it weren't so politically calculated. The German precedent that Blunkett cites is genuinely instructive, though perhaps not in the way he intends. Germany's temporary suspension of certain ECHR provisions was a response to the 2015 migration crisis, when over 1 million asylum seekers arrived in a single year. Britain's numbers, while significant, are hardly comparable. We're talking about 28,000 channel crossings this year, the highest since 2018, certainly, but not exactly an existential threat to British civilization. Using Germany's crisis response as justification for Britain's situation is rather like using wartime rationing as an excuse to restrict food shopping during a mild supply chain hiccup. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Blunkett's proposal is what it says about Labour's electoral calculations. The party clearly recognizes that immigration remains a potent political issue, one that helped deliver Brexit and has consistently favored conservative messaging. By adopting increasingly hardline positions, Labour is essentially trying to neutralize the Tories' traditional advantage on border security. It's smart politics, But it comes at the cost of abandoning principles that were once central to Labour identity. The practical implications of suspension are genuinely mind-boggling. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper is already pushing legislation to limit judicial discretion in deportation appeals, essentially trying to tie judges' hands when it comes to Articles 3 and 8. Combine that with Blunkett's suspension proposal, and you're looking at a legal framework where successful deportation appeals become virtually impossible. It's efficiency through authoritarianism, and while it might clear the hotel backlog, the constitutional implications are profound. Meanwhile, the Conservatives are watching this Labour lurch rightward with what must be a mixture of amusement and concern. Kemi Badenoch has ordered her own review of ECHR withdrawal, with findings expected at the Tory party conference. Imagine the irony, Labour implementing ECHR suspension while the Conservatives are still conducting reviews about whether it's a good idea. It would represent a complete inversion of the traditional political landscape, with Labour outflanking the Tories on immigration control. Blunkett's additional proposal for a French boat licensing system adds another layer of international complexity to this already fraught situation. He wants Britain to persuade France to create a registration system that would prevent anyone from buying, transporting, or selling boats without proper authorization. The idea is that French authorities could then raid warehouses and confiscate dinghies before they are used for channel crossings. It's not entirely without merit. Disrupting the supply chain of people's smuggling operations could be more effective than intercepting boats at sea. But it relies on French cooperation at a time when cross-channel relations remain strained over everything from fishing rights to trade disputes. The enforcement implications are equally complex. Even with suspended ECHR provisions, you still need somewhere to send people, and you still need countries willing to accept them. The logistics of mass deportation aren't solved simply by removing legal obstacles. They require diplomatic agreements, processing capacity, and enormous financial resources. Germany's temporary success was partly because they were dealing with clearly defined nationalities during a specific crisis period. Britain's asylum seekers come from dozens of countries, many of which are either unwilling or unable to accept returnees. What's particularly striking about this entire debate is how it demonstrates a complete hollowing out of traditional political categories. We have Labour peers advocating ECHR suspension, while Conservative leaders commission reviews. We have the party of Clement Attlee and the European Convention on Human Rights. Britain helped draft the bloody thing, now contemplating its abandonment for administrative convenience. It's a fundamental realignment that would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago. The electoral calculation behind this shift is coldly rational. Labour won the last election partly by convincing voters they could manage immigration more competently than the Conservatives, not more liberally. Starmer's team clearly believes that appearing tough on border control is essential to maintaining that trust, even if it means adopting policies that would have horrified previous Labour generations. Its politics is pure pragmatism, stripped of ideological considerations and focused entirely on maintaining power. Yet there's something deeply unsettling about this pragmatic abandonment of principle. The ECHR wasn't created as a bureaucratic inconvenience to be suspended whenever deportation targets aren't being met. It emerged from the ashes of World War II as a fundamental commitment to human dignity and legal protection. Treating it as a temporary impediment to efficient administration represents a profound shift in how Britain views its relationship with international law and human rights. The long-term implications extend far beyond immigration policy. If Britain can suspend human rights commitments for administrative convenience in one area, what's to stop future governments from doing the same in others? Civil liberties, once abandoned, have a tendency not to return automatically when the immediate crisis passes. The precedent being established here could reshape British governance for decades. So there you have it, Labour's quiet revolution on immigration policy, driven not by ideological conviction, but by electoral necessity and administrative frustration. Lord Blunkett's ECHR suspension proposal represents either a pragmatic response to genuine crisis or dangerous abandonment of fundamental principles, depending on your perspective. What's certain is that it demonstrates how far British politics has shifted rightward on immigration, when even Labour grandees are advocating positions that would have been considered extreme just a few years ago. The question now is whether Starmer will follow through on this advice, or whether constitutional concerns will ultimately prevail over political convenience. Either way, the very fact that such proposals are being seriously discussed within Labour circles tells us everything we need to know about the current state of British immigration politics. What's your take on Labour's rightward shift on immigration? Are they finally getting serious about border control or abandoning their principles for political gain? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to UK Connors. Because in British politics today, the only certainty is that tomorrow's headlines will be even more surprising than today's.